Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the 9th Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust Annual Lecture on Values-Based Leadership. I'd like to acknowledge our 9th speaker, Mr. Wayne Duvenage, his wife Helen, also our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs, Professor Mabokang Monapula Mapasela, the Chair of the Rhodes Business School Board of Management and Dean of the Faculty of Commerce, Professor David Suri, Dr. Percy Chinganga, who is the Rector of the College of Transfiguration, who's representing the Archbishop tonight, Mr. Richard Gaber, who's the Chair of the Makanda Grahamstown Business Forum. I'm just going to run through the order of the proceedings. So I'll shortly hand over to our DVC, Professor Mabokang Monapula Mapasela, who will welcome you all this evening. That will be followed by a short prayer from Dr. Percy Chinganga. Then we were going to play the video, which we've now already played, as I said, for technology purposes. And then I will introduce our 9th speaker. Mr. Wayne Duvenage will then deliver the annual lecture, 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A, which will be moderated by myself. We will then announce the book prize winner for the Responsible Leadership Award, and Professor Suri will kindly read the citation for that. And then we will conclude with a vote of thanks from the MBA 22 class president, Bonnie Mchunu. So, Professor Monapula Mapasela, please.
Program Director, Professor Owenske, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, and trustees of the Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust in absentia, Rector of the College of Transfiguration, Dr. Percy Chinganga, Dean of Commerce, Professor David Suri, Mr. Richard Gaber, our guest speaker, Mr. Wayne Duvenage, and to your beautiful wife, Helen. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good evening. Good evening. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sizuma Bizela, I would like to extend a warm and heartfelt welcome to you all this evening as we gather for the 9th Annual Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust Lecture on Values-Based Leadership. The Archbishop Thabo Makgoba Development Trust Lecture on Values-Based Leadership is an annual lecture hosted by the Rhodes Business School, whose vision is transforming business for a sustainable world. Tonight, we come together to delve into the profound topic of values-based leadership, a subject of paramount importance in today's complex and ever-changing world. Our guest speaker for tonight's annual lecture, Mr. Wayne Duvenage, who follows a distinguished line of past speakers, epitomizes the commitment of Archbishop Thabo Makgoba to promote values-based leadership throughout our continent. He follows a really long list of speakers who have not only shared their wisdom, but who have also demonstrated through their actions what it means to lead with integrity, with compassion, and commitment to a better society. Let me take a moment to acknowledge the speakers from previous years. In 2015, we had Professor Thuli Madonsela, former public protector of the Republic of South Africa. In 2016, we had Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe, former president of the Republic of South Africa. In 2017, we had Dr. Krasha Mashel, former First Lady of the Republic of South Africa. In 2018, we had Makosi Koza, former Member of Parliament. Dr. Makosi Koza, pardon me. In 2019, we had Dr. Suleiman, founder of the Gift of Givers. In 2020, we had Mr. Mcebisi Jonas, former Deputy Minister of Finance of the Republic of South Africa. And in 2021, we had Mr. Tito Mboweni, former Governor of the South African Reserve Bank and former Minister of Finance. In 2021, as I said, so in 2021, we had Mr. Tito Mboweni, former Governor of the South African Reserve Bank and former Minister of Finance of the Republic of South Africa. In 2022, we had Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, CEO of Business Leadership South Africa.
First insights regarding Wayne. Shortly after I joined, Wayne was then the CEO of Avis. He was kind enough to sponsor a placement in that space. One of the defining moments for me interviewing kid in school was Avis actually created a sustainable electric harvest. I note that Avis seem to have too many electric vehicles running. Always in the background, it's fossil cars. But anyway, the story that Wayne told me was that I think you're in Durban and there was a young manager who said to you, pulled you to one side and said, "Can you see there's something wrong here?" And you looked and said, "No, I don't think there's anything that's wrong here." So no, you need to look closer. But anyway, what was happening is that the cars were going in, being washed, going into the drying section, getting dried and going straight out into the rain. And the manager had to point this out to Wayne. And then Wayne said, "Yes, I can see there's something wrong here." So he called his management team together and said, "Can you see there's something wrong here?" And people said, "No, we don't see there's anything wrong here." And Wayne coined for me the expression, the stupidity of business. And I think that, again, it demonstrates that people don't always see things that they're supposed to see. And this is where we need to pay attention to that. Now, just some statistics before I hand over to Wayne. And these are rather frightening, to be honest with you. So I read today that, and we're talking Q2 statistics, just for so Q2 for mining. In 2021, the mining sector contributed in that quarter 77 billion rand to corporate income tax. In the most recent quarter, it's now 12 billion rand. If we look at the largest contributors to tax, private income tax in the 2021-22 tax year, so that's personal income tax, 36%, VAT was 25%, corporate income tax was 20.7%, and the other was about 20%. Now, if we consider the absolute corporate income tax, pre-pandemic, it was 214 billion rand. Funnily enough, and we never expected this, in 2021-22, it shot up to 323 billion rand. And a lot of that was due to the commodity boom that happened and how the mining sector actually grew tremendously from Q1 2020 to Q2 2021, going from 8 billion to 31 billion rand, but back down now to 12 billion rand. Now, many students are under the misconception that you don't pay taxes, perhaps because you don't, maybe you're not earning a salary yet, but everybody pays taxes. Every time we go to the shop, we pay VAT. You know, every time we put petrol in our car, we pay a levy. And many people are not aware, again, of the systemic risk that we face with Eskom. Eskom's debt load is currently 423 billion rand. And if you take the total value of our gross domestic product, which is 1.16 billion rand, Eskom's debt as a proportion of our GDP is 36%. Now, the government is committed to pay 254 billion rand to reduce the debt, and they recently paid over 16 billion rand. If you take that figure of debt alone, it exceeds the corporate income tax that all companies pay in South Africa. So we're very interested to hear tonight, Wayne, organization undoing tax abuse, something that is material in terms of our own pockets and how we need to make sure that the money gets spent where it's supposed to go. Thank you. Please take the podium.
Thanks. Thanks, Owen, Professor Skay, and thanks everybody for being here. I think all the names of the big brass have been read out. So as an activist, everybody's equal, and there will be no more protocols to be followed from my side. Anyway, so I just do want to express my gratitude to you, Owen, when you called me and invited me. And I know that there were others, the Archbishop himself and then Professor Caesar Mapazela and others who gave the nod to this invitation and my presence here this evening. And also to yourselves, thanks for your time. It really is an honor to be this is the subject of value-based leadership that is extremely important, as we heard earlier on, worldwide. I think we need to pay more attention to this issue if we are to save ourselves from ourselves and the destruction and the consequences of our actions, or rather the inactions on matters that we should be tackling beyond the boundaries of business and government as usual. Destruction that looms if we continue in the manner that we do is not only limited to humanity, but to all life that hangs in the balance of our delicate ecosystems, increasingly threatened by man's greed and insatiable desire for more than we need. So while paying at the same time minimal regard to excessive waste, pollution, and the processing of systems or issues that give rise to the extinction of species. I think before I delve into the concept and the impact of values-based leadership, I'll share my thoughts as what it means to me. And as Owen indicated, a number of years ago, we've gone through a number of experiences that reflect on this topic. It's not difficult to work out just from the title of values-based leadership what it means, but it is something that is difficult to implement, especially with authenticity, because there are largely a few factors there that pertain to potentially lost shareholder and leadership gains, and these work against the concept of value-based leadership. But when it is achieved, the positive impact and the values that it brings on organizational culture is immense. And at its core, the application of strategic day-to-day decision-making based on values that are rooted in ethics and moral foundations is so important, more so today than ever before. Essentially, values-based leadership takes a broader view of a company or an organization's impact beyond that which is solely defined by its shareholders' perspectives. It is when leadership casts their minds beyond the business profitability at all costs by adopting a stakeholder matrix approach to assess their business impact. Being the planet. Sorry. Okay. So as I was saying, this broader stakeholder matrix approach helps us to assess through values-based leadership our impact on other areas, which are commonly known as the triple P process, which goes beyond profits, as I said, to our impacts on society and the environment. I think this is now coined more aptly in the ESG programs that are rolling out and the focus on environment, society, and governance. we started to focus on our role as what it means to become a responsible corporate citizen. At the time, we never saw this as the value-based leadership that we talk about today, but it is and was exactly that. And this newfound focus on our impact at the time on our planet evolved into developing our sustainability journey. In those days, water use in the urban areas, I'm going back to 2007, was water was cheap, it was available, it was ample, the infrastructure was still strong. And we really just didn't understand how much we were using. And so we started to measure, and everything does revolve around measurement. We started to measure the impact. It was very interesting to just go around the boardroom and ask the executives, how much water do you think we use to wash each car? And the average came out at about 20 liters as a guess. The reality when we measured it was 180 liters per vehicle that we washed. And it was mind-blowing when you started multiplying that by the number of cars and then washing them in the rain, as we say. It was crazy. And at the same time, in these vehicle depots, the new ownership by a large corporate conglomerate had given us funds to expand our depots. This is where we wash, clean service vehicles, store them. But we were a long way down that plan when we had to halt it and introduce a decision of spending a lot of money, additional money that wasn't budgeted for on water recycling plants, millions of rands. And it was, I remember the heated debates, and the bean counters were really asking and showing us that the return on this investment wasn't as good as it could or should be in their minds. But it came down to the one question that I think pulled the trigger on the decision, and it was around, is this the right thing to do? It sets aside the fact that maybe the return at the time wasn't the best, but is it right to allow water that had been prepared by a municipality for drinking purposes to be flushed down the drain after every car is washed, not to recycle? So I guess this was the test. Just carry on. This we managed to convince plants at the 4 depots that we were upgrading at the time. It was truly a cost benefit that was only realized later on. So often in business, when you're trying to make this cost benefit decision, you return your investment, you don't understand and don't see what lies ahead in the future. And I'd left Avis for some time, but did get a message back when Cape Town went through the almost day zero droughts, that the management were very pleased we took that decision several years earlier. It was the only car rental company that was washing its cars and not spending any money in doing so, giving it competitive edges. And but the money that they save now, compared to what they thought they would at the time, is immense. And so I think to the bean counters and to everybody really who needs to try and unpack, you don't understand at the time what that future value is going to be. Just know, you just need to know that when you take decisions that might not bring the rands and cents to the bottom line in the next few years, but will impact your profits. It will impact your bonuses that you take home. But the positive benefit is to the planet and to the future of humanity in as a little way that it might seem at the time. So it goes without saying that far too often the calculation and desire for good financial returns on such investments do get in the way of making these meaningful value-based decisions. But if leadership is authentic in their decisions and pay respect to the consumptive nature of the businesses that they manage, or they seek to alleviate the societal pressures that relate to their operations, they will make the right decisions. And in almost every instance, positive financial returns do mount up, often ahead of the expectations that they had. The meaningful and intangible benefits, however, are really gained by the employee alignment and engagement with an ethical brand. And that played out powerfully in the organization at the time. Another powerful value that drives employee connection and customer attraction to brands is that of service excellence. The impact of meaningful customer centricity comes when it is driven through extensive training programs, combined with the development of meaningful customer satisfaction indexes and programs that recognize and reward customer-centric behavior throughout the organization. And this, again, was an experience that I had when the finance team started questioning the millions of rands that we started to pour into a CSI program that measured, if it could, we would go down to individual level, and if not to team level, and then started to base all our incentives largely on what customers rated the experience with the organization, down to individual level. And it was a lot of money. And very difficult to quantify the benefits, but it came down to another discussion of, is it right to do this? Is it right to introduce a program that exceeds customers' expectations? Because this is a value that you need to drive if you're in a competitive service industry. And so again, robust decisions making took place, and it was quite interesting to see how that played out. We did this right up to CEO level. So the CEO's salary incentive was based largely as well, I think 50% at the time, on the company's customer satisfaction index. And it took on a whole new meaning for the organization on customer centricity, and started to be lived deep in throughout the organization, right down to debt collectors, the debt collecting department. And I think looking back at these real life experiences, it did teach me and made me understand and realize that when this type of values-based leadership is taken, it's easier to deliver when it is measurable and when it is authentic in the rationale, the purpose, and the application of these values-based decisions. And if they're central in the strategic intent of the business, they have and have experienced that the immense positive impact on the organization's culture throughout all levels, not only by the staff, but also by suppliers and customers. So I emphasize this promotion of values-based principles, especially those focused on product, on people and planet. And I don't for 1 minute reduce the element of profitability into the realms of meaninglessness. Of course, profitability is very, very important. It is the lifeblood of organizations. You need to grow it. You need profit to reinvest and to reward your investors and your staff. But it is clear, and it remained very pivotal in some of these decisions, that these decisions eat into the profitability that is used to pay dividends. It is used to pay incentives. And it is a hurdle, and it is the barrier that thwarts these decisions so often, that leaders walk away from the right decisions when it comes to values and just stick to the focus of maximizing profits at all times. I think the advent of digital platforms and social media has heightened consumer activism, and that we've seen a lot of in recent years. Bad experiences, bad government or bad leadership decisions are amplified through social media. And it has forced companies and government to keep up their guard, especially on societal and environmental issues. And the world is filled with organizations that have suffered from a lack of values-based leadership. And we've had our fair share in South Africa. I don't have to remind you, but if you remember the likes of the McKinseys, KPMGs, Bains, SAP, and others, ABB, they've succumbed to unjust multi-million rand contracts and gains during the state capture years. And a common agenda in these and other companies exposed during the Zondo Commission were the layers of middlemen and facilitation costs that added zero value to their work undertaken within the state. And these became costs that you and I have to pick up. Had these corporate organizations fostered a culture of values-based leadership, the attentive staff within those companies would have been comfortable and would have been very easy for them to make use of the reliable and safe whistleblower and ethics hotlines. And I can hazard a guess that in those dealings that were taking place at SARS and Eskom at the time, there was certainly a number of staff that could see something was wrong, but there was a fear. There was a fear to be able to speak up because you would be getting in the way. And if they did raise some concerns, they were certainly told to look the other way. This is the sign of organizations that do trip up if they base some of these leadership decisions where there's baseless leadership around values-based decision-making and strategies that unfold in these organizations. And you can rest assured that if you had gone to all of those companies just prior to the fallouts that happened and asked the executives, how strong are you in the space of honesty and integrity and accountability and unjustified profit gouging and contracts with governments that makes no sense in the amount of money that you can gain. I mean, in McKinsey's case, nearly R1 billion. And I asked the executives at the time when we were dealing with this fallout, several hundreds of millions of rand, what did you do and how did you justify that income? Because just if you take the 10% of savings or additional revenues that could be earned as the guiding calculation to what consulting companies like this earn, they certainly didn't bring any savings or additional revenue to the tune of 10 billion rand to Eskom. So it's just unjustified. It's just unethical completely. And had they had the values-based leadership that they ought to have had, I don't think they would have fallen into that trap. Remember the insurance company in 2019 who denied a life cover policy to a husband who was shot in an attempted hijack in his driveway. And they denied the claim because he hadn't clearly stated his diabetic status. Seriously. The family was going to suffer a payout that was genuinely theirs, that paid up their account, and they were not missing in any payments to the insurance company, but they tried to get out of it because he hadn't declared his status of diabetes. It took one tweet that went viral. Several tens of thousands of customers lost in the space of a week before they reversed that decision. There was no ethics. There's no morality in decisions like that. And those people that were involved in that decision made it because the policies and the thinking of leadership in that organization was not ethical. You know, if you go back over the past century or so, corporations have gravitated from serving the purposes of the community to largely self-interest. There's nothing inherently wrong in improving shareholder benefits, as I've said, but problems arise when this pursuit overshadows the purpose of serving community and society. And so maximizing shareholder value creates this dysfunction with society and gives rise to a self-centered or a winner-takes-all culture that invites corruption, invites social injustices and inefficiencies of the nature that I've just reflected on. Companies that are low on values-based leadership tend to create these strategic attention deficit disorders of accelerated progress and maximizing profits. And at the same time, they start to lose control instead of focusing on their core value values within their business. Far too often we read corporate annual reports that create this facade of success. They use these vanity metrics that really don't say much when you unpack them. And they overclaim their successes, so often in a manner that blinds the institutional shareholders to the organization's reality. To this day, there are just too many large organizations that still operate within this straitjacket of shareholder maximization, which is shaped and distorted by financial incentives for corporate executives. My rough calculation on what happens when organizations achieve their maximum bonuses and incentives that they pay out to the entire organization is that 70 to 80% thereof is received by the top 15 to 20% of the employees or the managers in that organization. And the rest, the other 20%, are shared by the other 75 to 80% of the staff. There's something wrong. And it's a factor that exacerbates the inequality gap in the world, and certainly in South Africa. Now, of course, waiting for executives where risk is higher in leadership can be warranted, but this excessive skewed nature of these incentive payouts leaves a bad taste in the mouth of customers and staff alike. And in such organizations, the main index of success associated with worth is the amount of money they make for shareholders and executives. They often disregard how that money was made and the impact they've had on society. And this is why there are so many academic research papers in business schools that are challenging organizations to redefine the meaning of corporate purpose, which is very necessary to quell the growth of dissent amongst the public and investors, and urging for corporate social justice and rewarding of ethical conduct, along with meaningful corporate purpose grounded in the long-term values that invest in the future of humanity. So by introducing a culture of values-based leadership, it is one that helps organizations to support things like coaching of staff in courageous conversations and implementing of the awards of moral courage and social justice. And just as we did with Alan Chellan at the time at our Durban operation, it could have been a case of, ignoring the obvious stupidity that we were doing instead of rewarding what he had brought up into the organization. And I must say that Alan went on to lead our corporate social investment programs in a number of our regions as he grew throughout the organization. So the time is right for re-examining the status purpose, I believe, of public companies and changing the mindset of how business success is measured. This should become the mantra of the consumer and the influencer and the youth as they grow into these organizations' roles and start challenging the conscience of those who make decisions at the apex of the corporate machine. But I want to turn to how the difference of values-based leadership plays out between the private and public sectors. And it's important to note that there is a single big issue that distinguishes leadership within these two segments, and that is the level of influence that the consumer or the citizen has over the organization. It largely comes down to the element of choice. In dealing with the private sector, the public and the consumer typically has a choice. Most of the time, they don't have to buy from you. Obviously, price is a differentiator and a main driver, but where price and location and supply and service is similar, it does start coming down to the decisions of ethics, of how the organization is conducting itself and conveying itself in its authentic affinity to strong ethics and service orientation and governance values. On the other hand, in government, they really prioritize values-based leadership as highly as they should. In the context of South Africa's past, having exited a period of immoral values that shaped the apartheid era leadership, we certainly haven't seized the baton to make the progress one would have expected of us, especially given our sound constitution that promotes strong values and ethical conduct. So in the private sector, when customers have a number of suppliers and businesses and brands to choose from, employees are more likely to feel empowered to uphold and enforce the company's stated values. But in the public sector, values-based leadership takes a backseat. Citizens do not have the ability to choose their government unless there's a every 5-year election period. And in that 5-year period, if your elected councillors start trashing the area that you live in, start impacting negatively on your property values, on your business's ability to have the necessary services, it's not easy. You can't go and choose another council to do this work in the same place. You can't go and choose another government while this is happening. You're stuck with them in that area, in that country. And it's very, very tough. And it's very, very frustrating. It's impossible for them because you become trapped in these declining municipalities and nations that suffer from a gross lack of ethical leadership. High-level research on the values that residents and businesses seek from their local governments leaders boils down to a handful, just a few essential elements of reliable and safe services, well-maintained infrastructure, and the lowest cost production of these services without compromising quality, because you don't want your taxes to go up to the extent that they have. And finally, another element that society seeks is accountability with consequences for unacceptable conduct. These core values constitute the cornerstone of a citizen-centric culture that residents and citizens seek from their governments. We seek it from them, from both national and local governments. We seek this citizen-centric thinking when it comes to our education systems, our welfare, our healthcare, justice and human rights. And again, at the lowest cost, the lowest taxes possible. And when public servants deviate from these core values, we long for swift reaction and accountability. And it just isn't there, because there is no value in the thinking of people who fill these positions of authority. It's really, really frustrating. And we can see it in our nation as it descends and as we start to block ourselves off to try and ensure that we are not dragged down by the anxiety levels that continue to rise when we read so much negativity that takes place. And unfortunately, the opposite side of efficient governments are ones that lie in an environment where the door is open to corruption and cronyism, nepotism, fraud, and self-gain. And this has largely become our reality, and it needn't be this way. Given our country's diversity, given the abundance of resources we have and the talent and the gift of a peaceful transition to democracy some 3 decades ago, we have the ability to draw on the experiences of successful nations that have made significant progress in their economies by combating corruption and improving ethical conduct within their societies and embracing a values-based decision-making process. But now we reach a critical stage in South Africa to adopt a similar approach of leadership. One that is focused on serving the best interests of citizens. And all it takes is a significant shift in leadership mindset to base these decisions on this core citizen-centric thinking to redefine our nation's trajectory, to ensure sustained economic growth and reduce the unemployment and improve the inequality levels. Why is it that we're not there? I mean, following Cyril Ramaphosa's speech, the Tumamina speech at his 2019 inauguration, most South Africans believed this was the transition we were waiting for. Most South Africans said, this is it. We did too at ARTA. We actually had to start thinking of our strategy. Where do we go? Because if our job is mainly focused on challenging corruption, this was going to possibly put us at risk, but it was a risk that we were very happy to undertake. It was a risk that we were very happy to fold the organization, because if we didn't need to be there, we shouldn't be there. But alas, and tragically, it failed to launch. And along with it, the hopes and the prosperity of millions of South Africans has faded. I mean, have you ever thought of what could have been? If you just go back to when Jacob Zuma came into power in 2008, 2007, 2008, what our reality would have been today if we had values-based leadership entrenched, authentically entrenched into the leadership of this country. By now, my calculations put the fact that we would, if we had grown, we could have grown by about 5% per annum. If we just put in place simple measures around ethics-based leadership and created an economy and drove an economy with policies that made sense, our unemployment rate would have declined to below 15% today. Manufacturing, tourism, logistics, mining, industries would have swelled our GDP to around $650 billion per annum, which is about 60% higher than the 400 billion that it is today. I imagine one can see the growth in tourism, the tourist-centric culture that we could have built, and taken our number of international visitors from well above or well below 10 million pre-COVID to over 15 million visitors per annum, international visitors. And I think we could have easily kept, even despite that tourism growth would have come despite the fact that I think we could have contained the rand to 10 rand to the dollar in today's terms, as we sit here today. So we lacked this visionary and ethical leadership. We lacked the ability then to deal with our inequality levels, and more importantly, the number of people that slip into poverty instead of out of it every single day in South Africa. It really is sad. But if we had got this right, I can assure you no other country would have been able to come close to South Africa and our ability to attract attention, investment, and deliver a prosperous nation to the world. All of this could have been our reality today if we were blessed with leaders who put our country before their political party and who served their people with ethical, citizen-centric values. So if this has been our possibility, the opportunity that has been lost, and it is a noble one, by the way, that every political party, any political party, would have been proud to preside over. One has to unpack and understand what are the opposing forces to this. And the only way one can describe this antithesis of national prosperity and citizen upliftment is in the case of Babita Deokaran and this tragedy that she and her family went through. As we witness the mindset of the leadership that pervaded at the time and still does. It is one that's devoid of ethical values and accepts and promotes corruption, maladministration, and nepotism. You know, when I draw on how we handled occasional theft and fraud in the corporate sector, it really was just common sense. It's swift. We used the same law as government departments. We moved very fast in the couple of cases that we've had to suspend people. Within a couple of weeks, investigations are complete. The disciplinary hearings are held. People are dismissed, and they're charged. They're charged with their conduct using the rule of law. It's not difficult, but this wasn't the case in Babita Deokaran's matter. You know, the evidence was so clear to the MEC of Health, so clear in what went wrong. Imagine you preside over this Department of Health and one of your senior managers is assassinated. And 2 years later, the people that are highly implicated in this matter are still receiving full salaries. It took a year to have them suspended. Why? We have the same laws, labor laws. And this excuse that they give that, no, they're waiting for the investigations of the SIU is just crazy. So what does it tell you? And remember, there's only 3 positions between the MEC of Health in Gauteng and the president. And the president was well aware of Babita's assassination and what was going on and the billion rands of contracts that were leading to corruption at the Tembisa Hospital, robbing society of much needed funds to keep them healthy. It just is sick. And it tells you one thing. It tells you that This is a party, this is a ruling party that thrives and lives off corruption. If it was a party that was serious about tackling corruption, then they would have done something fast, swift, and dealt with it. They had the opportunity to show the world that they were able to deal with corruption, and they never took it. And so one can only assume that there are people in high places implicated. And when we look at ATA, at how corruption plays out in the public sector, it is everywhere. It is linked through all the layers of government. It wouldn't have taken long for a proper investigation to allow the MEC to do what they should have done. But they didn't. And we have to ask ourselves, why does this continue to be the case today? And there are many Tembisa hospitals types of cases in this country. Hundreds, if not thousands of them. Multi-million rands being stolen by the state every day. And executives in the ANC know this. But they lack the meaningful action and the ability to seek accountability. And this is the hallmark and the behavior of an organizational culture that not only condones, but promotes corruption. It promotes maladministration and unethical conduct, despite having the power to act. They just don't. And to put it bluntly, this display of inaction against people who are so obviously involved in corruption is not only indicative of an organization that has zero ethical values approached to its leadership, but it depicts a ruling party that has become infested by a culture of corruption and cronyism. And it is now blind to the grossly immoral conduct that has permeated every level within that organization. And in saying that, I don't say everybody in the organization is bad, but its leadership leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to trying to implement and be serious about entrenching ethical-based leadership. I must say I laugh every time somebody calls the ANC a corrupt party and speaks out, as Andre de Ruyter did, and all the threats of being sued from the mouths of the leadership. We're going to sue you. We're going to take you to court. You can't call us a corrupt organization. We're not a corrupt organization. And then nothing happens. Nothing. Why is that? Well, it's because they know very well that they will probably lose a case like that in court. And if they lose a case like that in court, then the court verdict is one of exactly what they're trying not to have, that it is a corrupt party. And so, you know, I think we can say without fear, and I certainly do, that the ANC is to corruption as a spade is to digging. The real tragedy is that despite all of this, despite the civil society's full knowledge thereof, we've become numb to government's corrupt conduct and their rhetoric and false promises. We've become so numb that we start to check out of our democracy, that our voter turnout numbers continue to dwindle. You know, in the 2019 elections, 27 million people were registered to vote, and only less than 18 million turned up. The decline of 8% on the previous year. And of particular concern is the low youth turnout, whereby less than 23% of people between the ages of 18 and 29 turned up at the elections. And this is their future. This is the future of the youth. And they need to take hold of it. And they need to get out there and tell the executives what they want and what they need from them. We're not doing enough. I think we're just sitting back and allowing ourselves to be pigeonholed as another state that is failing in Africa. And that shouldn't be the case. Our reality today is one that we have to deal with, the fact that we have an amazing country. We have more diversity, minerals, flora, fauna, coastlines. We've got so much going for us. And yet we just sit back and allow it to be wasted. We allow middleman fees to be acceptable in the transactions that take place in government. In places like Canada, they have outlawed it. If you pay a facilitation fee in a transaction with government, and that is where no value is added for the role that person played. It is deemed as corruption. It is a criminal offense. It's not difficult to make that a law in this country. But if they made that a law, the ruling party will lose a lot of money. And these are the things that I think we should start demanding referendums on and protesting on. We need to become more participative in our democracy. We need to ensure that our government doesn't fail us and start holding them to account. And we do see this now, where civil society is starting to do the work of the law enforcement process, where we are starting to lay the charges. We're starting to bring civil cases and claims. And it is emerging now more and more that citizens are going to start holding officials to account in areas of, like you have done here at Makanda, but in many municipalities. The taking over of water, wastewater treatment plants is now starting to become a reality. We don't have the luxury of sitting back and saying, no, I pay my taxes, so why should I do anything? If we're to save this country, we have to do more. We have to get involved. We have to provide what we're doing now in the launch of WaterCan, providing the water testing and quality heat map of all our water around the country. Citizens will do this job because government is unreliable. And we don't have to say we can't do it. We can through citizen science processes that are unfolding. In conclusion, I just want to say that values-based leadership is not an option. It is a necessity. And whether it's in the private or public sector, we need to embrace values that heighten the priorities that we place on society and the environment as a necessary path to prosperity and a sustainable future. And as we navigate the complexities of our world, it is imperative that we embrace these values and the leadership-based values that we need to entrench in our organizations, especially in the public sector. If we're going to endure the decisions and ensure that we become action-orientated and start prioritizing the best interests of citizens, then we have no option but to start putting our government under pressure to do so. And this fundamental shift in mindset and approach is critical for building prosperous and just societies, where accountability and transparency and ethical conduct needs to be at the forefront of our decision-making, which will ultimately shape our collective destiny. I thank you for your time.
We are hang on schedule, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. This Shomai. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so we now open the floor to questions. So sometimes I try to take so 2 or 3 at a time, and then we go. Philip. You're going to have to shout. I'll repeat it if necessary. Okay.
So, when it comes to values in government, surely the strongest statement of values is our Constitution. And our Constitution is quite unusual in that it has strong recognition of the need for restitution for past wrong. Do you think that would be a core value of government? And yet, if we look at these sort of issues that you raised, and the core value seems to be to stay in power so a small elite can enrich themselves. And I think it's important to understand why this is such a big disconnect from what I would see as the core values of our Constitution, because the real outrage should not be at people like us paying taxes and the money getting stolen, because it's not our money once it's in the fiscus, it belongs to everyone. Where the real outrage should be is that poverty and inequality are not being addressed by a government that is supposed to be driven by these core values of what is supposed to be the best constitution in the world. Your thoughts on that, much appreciated.
Okay, I'll try to paraphrase that. So the issue is around our constitution, a fine constitution, restitution to overcome the legacy of the past. Ultimately, the taxpayer money is our money. It's what it should be focused on in relation to addressing that. You got that, Wayne?
I mean, you're quite right. All things being equal, I mean, we were blessed with a very peaceful and transition to democracy with an amazing constitution. And you'd think that with the experiences under the apartheid regime, that it should have been a no-brainer for governments to move forward in the way that we expect. So why isn't it? And that's the question we ask. We pay our taxes, and they go into government's coffers, and it's maladministered, and it's wasted. And it's wasted and spent. I mean, we've worked out at ARTA that for every 1 kilometer of road we pay for, we could have got 3. For every RDP house we build and pay for, we could have got 3 clinics. And it just goes on. There's these layers of people that take their cut, and there is no shame. And when you speak to and you engage with people that play in this space, they don't see anything wrong. In fact, I spoke to a CEO of an organization who has a department called business development, and they pay fees to people in government who bring them contracts. And they too have no values when they do that, but they don't see what they're doing is wrong. People in the DTI space, Department of Trade and Industry, do not want to tackle so much that is going wrong in imports that are valued incorrectly, because, and this is the feedback you get from senior people, say, but it's okay. Yes, we may lose out on some of the taxes, but other businesses, smaller businesses are going to flourish. And they don't, because they start playing below the radar screen and everything starts to go south. So if you don't have the conscience and the values that business and governance is built on at the forefront of your thinking as you apply your leadership processes, you don't see it. So I can only explain it that way, where when we engage with managers who have been exposed by whistleblowers and doing wrong, it astounds me as to how little they see the wrong in what is happening. It's almost as if it's a negative defense mechanism to justify what they're doing is actually right. It's like, no, this is part of the process of redistribution of wealth. Not even thinking of the negative impact on the poor of those decisions. I don't know if I've answered the question, but I really just do get astounded at how our constitution, which is built on ethics, strong ethics, and conduct that needs to be promoting growth and equality, is just negated through this mindset of excuses. And it's greed. I think it boils down to greed. People become so blind to what they're doing wrong. And you see Edward Sodi and the guys, you know, you get a massive contract and suddenly you have to buy a garage, build a house or buy a garage for 15 vehicles. I mean, what is going wrong? That's sick.
Okay. Tabang,
we can always dominate the platform. Are there more questions?
just go for it. Thanks.
I think my concern, I think, is that my theory is that I think we've had 15-year break of good leadership in South Africa. A bit of Mandela, some of Mbeki, and the rest is just from since 1652, it's just a history of thievery. Why do I say this? I was quickly looking at the Stillwater Sibanye debacle about a year ago about the strike. So Fonderman earns 542,000 Rand a day. Right. They've got 64,000 employees there. I looked at the stats quickly. 60% of them are probably clerical level, so just about 38,000 Rand. They lost R1 billion because they would not give them an extra 1,000 Rand. You give those ones an extra 1,000 Rand, they get up to about 300 million, but not even. I think it's 30. But what I'm saying is that Neil's salary would have paid that in a month. He would have paid that, not a month, 2 months. He would have paid that. So now we sit with these disparities. And I think that all of SA's leadership learns from each other, where big groups just take and they don't give back to anyone. And I think the corporates are part of the problem.
Is there a question there? Okay, you got the question. Okay.
Yes, I want to hear your view about this proposition, that what you have defined in that proposition, the root cause of it is the lack of social cohesion in South Africa, whereby there is black and white, there's haves and have not. And if something is done by one group that is closely aligned to the others, they don't hold each other accountable or call it out. So we don't speak with one voice in order to call out what is wrong, irrespective of what is being done, because at the root cause is our lack of social cohesion. We see each other in groups and tribes, in political formation and so on. What is your view on that proposition? And secondly, if that you're in agreement with it, what ought to be done to turn that table to improve it?
We'll take one more.
Okay, I'm just going to yell.
Okay.
I'm getting back to the Constitution, which outlines our rights. And I think we've put a hell of a lot of responsibility on our rights. We keep talking, it's my right, it's my right. I don't hear so much about responsibilities. And I would like to see a shift in values. When everyone says, oh, it's my right to good education, I want to say, are you getting your bum into the classroom and sitting there and listening? It's my right to have water. What are you doing with that water? How much are you wasting? What are you putting into it afterwards? I'd like to see a shift in values to responsibilities. Is that possible? That's the first question. And the second one is also, I think, values-based. Could we persuade people who are elected or people in public services to use the public services, to use the public hospitals and clinics, compulsory? If you are elected to government, you must use the schools, the hospitals, the clinics that government provides. Can we do that?
Are we wanting mic shedding at this point? Okay, so we heard about disparity, social cohesion, responsibility, and whether people that are for doing it actually use it.
So yeah, I think corporates are part of the problem. And as I said, so often, so much in what I was talking about is that there is this skewed, absolutely outrageously skewed enrichment of the C-suite executives in business when they get it right. And if they just invested half of that and still took home millions in their bonuses back into their own people, back into longer term investments on communities, education programs. Can you imagine the power of those millions of rands into a community across the road in their vicinity, enabling people to be in a different position 25 years from now? And this is what's wrong, is that we're not making these corporate decisions of introducing real values into our decisions that will impact on societies for years to come. It's all short-termism. I'm not going to, I'm going to maximize this profit now so that I can take as much as I can now. And it carries through everywhere. It's a leadership issue, and it's a serious one that I think we as consumers need to start taking note of. But the biggest problem we have is verification of genuine, good leadership conduct, especially in the space of ESG. my daughter's moved into the whole sustainability game business, and it's just amazing how executives are, and we see this so often, want to just tick the box and do the bare minimum. That they have a sustainability program, that they do pay respect to societal issues, and they do not want to do anything beyond what is the bare minimum to be able to say that. And it's crazy. It's almost a case of a company saying they're going green because they've moved from 3-ply toilet paper to 1-ply. I mean, theoretically, yes, you can claim that you've made a move, but it's meaningless. So on the issue of the lack of social cohesion, I got a different view. I think we allow the populists to pander the view that we are divided. I don't think we are as divided as we think we are, or as the politicians like to make us out to be. And there was some research done on this by, I forget the organization. It was a number of years ago. Maybe things have shifted since then. But I think the Ubuntu nature and the togetherness of people across racial divides, of cross-class divides, is there. Sure, it can be improved. Sure, there are pockets where it is not right. The xenophobia and the issues that we have to grapple and deal with. But on the whole and on the main, I think we don't give ourselves enough credit or recognize and realize how united we are as a nation. We allow politicians to peddle the perception that we're not. But if you speak to each other, if you just go and expand your engagements with other sectors of society, the animosity and the hatred isn't there. Of course, there are going to be incidences, but those are the ones that flare up in the media. Those are the ones that the sensationalism is built around. And we think we're divided now suddenly, and everybody's in this terrible friction space. It's not, I don't believe it's the case. But I don't know everything. So to your point, I agree with you 100%. We've got to, and again, this is where, coming to your question, to your point on the responsibilities of the corporate citizen. If we're not training our staff and taking up the role that the education system drops, and drops badly. I mean, just think about what a good a class or a lesson, a series of lessons in the final year of school would do if it was based on how government works, how the structure of government is set up in South Africa, and why you need to participate in elections. Imagine a good series of lectures to grade 12 students on that space. Would that boost the amount of people that vote? Would that give us a greater understanding of why politics is important, why you shouldn't be ignoring it? And if we did that in the business space, because government doesn't do it in the education space, we could start changing perceptions. So I do think that we've got to play a bigger role in this values-based leadership in the corporate sector to drive our responsibilities as individuals, to make sure that we're not polluting the water, as you say, to make sure that we're not throwing the rubbish out the windows. And that's going to take a lot of work and time. But unless the values of that ethical conduct and the spending of the money, bringing in the training programs, bringing in the brand ambassador programs, giving people time off to understand, and as I said in the talk, creating these courageous conversations with our staff and enabling them. Unless we spend time on that and the money that goes with it and the values that are required to drive that, no, it's not going to happen. So what leaders do in the business world, they tend to say, well, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, our productivity levels are going to be impacted. So I do put a lot of the emphasis on business because, you know, we come out of societies and out of so many people enter the business world and they haven't had the grounding that, of two parents, the ability to learn from your parents. And the schools aren't teaching. So it's a foreign concept to me to have to rather keep my paper in my hand and wait till I see a bin. I'll throw it down. So that's deemed as irresponsible in your eyes and in my eyes maybe, but to the individual it's not. What's the problem? And that's because we lack the values-based leadership in our education system. We lack it in our corporate social responsibility systems, and we need to pay a lot more attention to it. So I think we must start to understand that it's all of our roles, it's all of our responsibilities to talk about these things and to stroke the conscience of the executives of corporate South Africa. And I love it when the youth do that. They do, and I think we've got to do more of that. And to me, the youth have a bigger role to play. But I think sometimes they find and feel that they don't understand how to play that role. They don't understand their power, actually. And that's where we've got, I think, all of us in this room and people that have had privileges, that we become blind to the privileges, need to start spending more time and sharing that time with others who need that time.
I think we'll leave the question on the public service going into the public hospital for now. Okay, but we got the, yeah. Okay. Next. Ashke.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much. Your speech was very eloquent, despite everything. My question has two parts. This in terms of responsible leadership. The implementation and the initiation of e-tolls, what does that have to do with responsible leadership? And then secondly, just with regards to value-based leadership, why was it important to take action?
Yeah, so the question is around the e-tolling, and there are two parts to that. Why, and what's it got to do with responsible leadership?
Yeah. Okay, but I just want to say to your point, I've actually written a piece, and we do quite a lot of that pushing government to say, you know, every one of you. I think it was after the Tumamina speech. No, it was after Cyril Ramaphosa's speech about his vision for new cities and modern cities and that. And we wrote a satirical piece straight after that said, we wished, and our vision for South Africa was every member of parliament using public hospitals, relying on the police to attend to their security needs, relying their kids going to public schools, and that we think it should be a law. And if our government and the president at the time had any value in the suffering of citizens, he would do that. Yeah, needless to say. So on the issue of e-tolls, let me just say that, and it was an issue that was so strong in my frustration that caused me to leave the corporate world. And I thought initially for a few months, maybe a year at most, sanity would prevail, but it didn't. So firstly, the notion of using digital technology, e-tolling technology works around the world, and the notion of user pays is not foreign, and we're not opposed to it. We didn't oppose that. They liked to have hopped on that we were just opposing user pays principles, which we weren't. What we were opposing as we dug deeper into this plan was a very deceitful plan. It was one that they were aiming to get just over R1 billion a year out of the country to the international based, Austrian based organization that got the tender. And the more we dug, the more we saw this deceit, that government and certain individuals and people would become the beneficiaries of a very, very deceitful campaign. And so we had to stop it. And we did the research and asked the questions. If the world average for the administration costs of a tolling system is 10%, between 9 and 10%, why was the e-toll scheme 30%? 30%, just the administration fees. If the cost of the road construction of that Gauteng Freeway project, just 3 years prior to its development, was in SANRAL's own annual reports, priced at around 6 billion rand. Why did it cost 18 billion rand? And so what they were doing was inflating the cost of the road construction. There was a lot of eating that was taking place in order to justify the higher administration costs. And so it just got out of hand. And we just said, this has to be challenged. We can't allow this. So COSATU was marching and blockading the roads, and the next day the roads were open again. And the DA were looking to score points in the elections, and that's fine. But civil society wasn't doing enough, and business was doing nothing. So it was a hard job for us to convince the business world to say we have to go and challenge government in court. And they don't do this. They really fear challenging government. But fortunately, we'd corralled them to exercise a bit of moral courage, and off we went. And we knew he'd come late. And it was no longer an issue of, I mean, at first we had our corporate hats on where it was just impacting on our business negatively. But when we started to unpack the impact it was having on society and the corruption, and let me just say this, in 2014, the executives of SANRAL were presenting to government, presenting to Makura, the premier at the time, that the e-toll costs was about 6.4 billion rand for the 5-year contract. That's what that was in their presentations. You know what we found out when we eventually got hold of the contract is that it was signed 3 years earlier, 4 years earlier. It was signed at 9.9 billion. So how do you tell the world and the public that this was the contract in your presentations, knowing that you'd signed it at some 50% higher? This is the lying. This is the deceit that was going on. And so it became a case of having to challenge it. And there were so many examples of why the scheme was going to go wrong. It ticked all the flags of failure. It relied on an efficient postal service. Needed that. It relied on an accurate NATIS vehicle registry system. Accurate. And that's 50% inaccurate. Nobody, I don't know how many of you, when you move, go into the NATIS website and say to NATIS, here's my new address. I mean, we don't do that. And it's not because you don't want to, it's just we don't have the systems and process. And then in the car rental industry, we could see the problem of number plate cloning. In other words, somebody just who's got a white Polo drives through the airport. Oh, there's a white Avis Polo, number plate, 150 Rand for a set of number plates. And we pick up their bill. We would have picked up their bill. And when we asked SANRAL how they're going to deal with this, they didn't have the answers. And so we could just see this thing floundering. And our research showed that even in places like Texas and Edinburgh, where they had introduced these, and Portugal, where they'd introduced these schemes, they fail the minute they go below 80% compliance. They fail. They spiral downwards because the 80% that are paying get a little bit pissed off with the fact that 20% aren't. And they start learning. And when there are no consequences, because government had no consequential management of people who didn't pay, and we proved that in court, it just spirals downwards. And so they don't even, and the SANRAL said they would get 90% compliance by the time within a few months of launch. They never got over 40%.
within 6 months, and then it started failing. And then we started the civil disobedience campaign, taking a leaf out of the Gilbert Marcus, the senior counsel in the Group Areas Act, was our senior counsel. And he said, Wayne, we go after SANRAL case by case. That's what they did in the Group Areas Act, because the minute you get a judgment on the past laws in your favor on one case, the precedent is set. And that's what we did. And we got 3,000 cases lined up, the mandates from 3,000 citizens, road users who were being summoned by SANRAL. And we said, we're going to take you on one by one. It took 4 cases on the Group Areas Act to get there. But it wasn't good for the elections in 2019. So Cyril tapped them on the shoulder and said, stop suing, stop this war, this lawfare strategy with society. And we won from there. So trying to do it very, very briefly, it was the values of user pays and technology is good when it's put in the wrong context, and when it's put to make billions and siphon out the country to make connected people rich, it is wrong. It has to be challenged to the extent that bad law has to be challenged in a way that you're prepared to go to jail. And we took 4 of us, and Bishop Jeff Davies was one of them in Joburg, who joined us. And we said in videos directly to the authorities, we will not pay, and we will advocate for everybody not to pay. And if you don't like it, arrest us now. And you've got to be prepared for that. And that was the fear that so many people had. The middle class, the motorist in Joburg was just so scared of being arrested. And we had to empower them with the knowledge that they could never be arrested. And if they were, then we'll phone us and we'll go and fight for their rights. And the rest is history. The scheme is dead, even though it limps along with 10% compliance, because there is about 30 million rand still going into the account every month. Somebody's drinking off that sweet stream of water, which is why they don't want to close it down. And they made the decision a year ago to close it down, but some corporates keep it alive on oxygen because they just don't want to cross swords with government. Not even the government departments are paying their retail bills.
So next time you drive in Joburg, you know, this is the person to thank for that, Kashka. Okay. Next question. Dion.
Speak up, it's fine, thank you.
Okay.
You can decline to answer this if you like. With all the many instances of corruption that we face in our society, how do you prioritize which cases to take on? Yes.
I'll just repeat it. I'll just repeat it. With all the cases that we've got going on in South Africa, how do you prioritize them?
Well, as a civil activist organization, I can just say this, that when we moved beyond e-tolls in 2016, we decided we weren't just going to be a typical NGO that exposed. I think the media do a great job of that. But we wanted to hold people's feet to the fire. And we were sick and tired of making law firms rich in that whole e-toll saga case. And we learned their strategies of enrichment. So we said we're going to build our own legal team, and we're going to engage with whistleblowers, and we're going to start fighting, building cases, just building cases as much as we can, do the work of poor investigations by the police and the Hawks, and build strong affidavits and lay charges. And the reason we did that was because, you know, even though Sean Abrams and the Jacob Zuma guys were just not allowing any of these cases to get to where they should, eventually things change. Eventually the rule of law flows, and you want those cases to have the information fresh when it was compiled, as opposed to trying to compile cases later. So that's how we started out doing that. And then we became overwhelmed, and the whistleblowers started engaging with us more and more. We employed a team and built a war chest for litigation. And we had Dudumnyeni, for instance, declared delinquent. It was a tough decision to do that. It cost us 6 million rand. It took 3 years. But the reason we took on that case was that she was just getting away with so much. She was headlines almost every week in the trashing of SAA. And we said, well, what do we do? How do we stop this? So we said, let's just have a ban from being allowed to be on any board. She was on the Hlatuzi Water Board at the time and Centlec. She was the chairperson of the Jacob Zuma Foundation, which, so I think it was so beautiful to write to the Jacob Zuma Foundation and say, please remove her. She's no longer your chairperson. She may not be, because she's a delinquent in that space. So what happens is we built this team of 45 staff, professionals, and we decided we had to pay market-related salaries to have the continuity and the expertise, and get investigators in. And then we realized we had to start putting in a process that approves. How do we approve which projects to take on? And they come at us fast. Some of them take a few days, and we built a methodology, a 5-step methodology that said, do the investigation properly, because so much of what was coming our way is not facts. It is hearsay. And I learned very quickly after employing Stefanie Fick, our advocate, about how you process the legal, how you process law. And you really have to have the facts, and you have to have the angle of attack within the right law. And if you don't get enough information, that's the first thing. Have you got enough information? The second thing is this substantive? There's a lot of theft and stuff that's taking place, but there's a ream of paper that's going missing compared to billions of rands. So you've got to say, well, how substantive is it? And if the facts are strong, and you can implicate people, you can bring it to the attention of the court that this is where the decision. Corruption is not an easy thing to always prove. But if you can do that and show where the gross maladministration is taking place and the waste and how the corruption was playing out and the fraud was being conducted, then those are the triggers that we pull that signal our need to go ahead. The last factor is the one that kills us at the moment, is capacity. We just don't have enough capacity. We should be 3 times our size. And so we have to bring in now and then project experts from outside to run some of our projects. But that becomes costly as well. It costs about 3 million rand a month to run ATA. And it is funded purely by donations, average 120 rand per individual. And it's mainly 90% as individuals, 98% as individuals and SMMEs, owner-based companies. Very little from corporates, from big corporates, a little bit from donor foundations. So we sit as an executive every Monday through our processes, and then from 12 to 1, we evaluate every project that comes in for consideration, which has been prepared by our investigations team that unpacks the link to our mandates and how strong the case is. And then we have to vote. We literally go around the table after listening to the project manager proposing why we should take this on. And it's interesting debates we have. And sometimes the factor of how sexy is this to drive civil society and making them excited about wanting to follow this project. So, when we decided to tackle the 1.8 billion rand that the Guptas were trying to ease out of the country. This is the rehabilitation fund that belonged to the Tegeta mine that they bought. As they were leaving, there was this 1.8 billion rand sitting in a trust, and they were trying to get it out through the Bank of Baroda. And we got wind of it, quickly got hold of Gwede Mantashe and said, this is your role. Stop it. Stop that money now. And they did nothing. We had to rush and get an interdict. Literally within a day, if we were a day or two late, the money would have gone, and we managed to stop it. Now, that isn't sexy to the public out there. Stopping car power ships, maybe stopping the nuclear deal, or being part of that was done by Earthlife Africa and SAFC. but we work and collaborate, by the way, with other organizations. So it's not an easy decision, but we open about 30 to 40 projects a year and close about as many. We've done about 260 in the last 7 years. And some of them are quick. Some of them take years and a long time and very, very costly. But we built up a war chest, a litigation war chest, because one of the factors in this game is to play the long game with government, the lawfare strategy that they bring, the interlocutory challenges, and they slow things down and they just push your legal costs up. But we've won 11 out of our 12 cases and they owe us money. Now to trying to get that money, I mean, we have to sequestrate Dudumyeni now to get our money back. But she doesn't care, so we'll do it.
So that concludes our Q&A. And thanks for the transparency on that last question. So, see, Wayne didn't duck and dive that question, Dion. You got the whole story now. Of course, we see that Ms. Mayeni's been arrested now. So we'll have to see the next saga in that. I think that deserves a round of applause again. Thank you very much. I'm now going to call upon Professor David Suri to come up and read out the citation, please. Thank you, Prof. Suri. It is working.
What did you say? This evening, it's my very great pleasure to announce the recipient of the Responsible Leadership Book Prize. The MBA class in their syndicate groups were required to prepare a model of leadership to show how responsible leadership can be encouraged and inculcated within the organization of which they are a member. The winning essay examined, critiqued, and suggested improvements to the leadership styles used within a large South African insurer. The notable highlights of the essay are: there is a clear need for responsible leadership in South Africa with several recent corporate scandals. Ethics and ethical competency are essential in developing a responsible leader. A distinction is made between leadership and management, demonstrating the potential and value of shifting from a transactional to a transformational leadership style. This is relevant as we operate in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment of doing business. So to put it bluntly, leadership needs to keep up, and better still, be ahead of. Furthermore, the systems, nature of leadership, and the ability of a responsible leader to weave a bridge across and between internal and external stakeholders must be continuously explored. Finally, the essay concludes the need for authentic African leadership for an African company by focusing on leadership through persuasion rather than domination. My congratulations to Kurt van Staden, the 9th recipient of the Archbishop Thaba Makgoba Development Trust Annual Lecture Responsible Leadership Book Award. And I'd like to ask Mr. Divinage to come and hand that over.
Thanks very much, Bob. Well done. Thanks, sir. If you can just stay here, Wayne. The DVC could please just join us, and the Dean and Mrs. Duvenage and Richard. Please, if you could just come around here, thanks. And Bonnie and Kurt. I'm going to ask our DVC, and sorry, and Dr. Chinganga, please, if you could please come up as well. Thank you. I'm going to ask our DVC to hand this over to you, to our speaker.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so just before I hand over to Bonnie for the vote of thanks, just to express my own thanks to our team that put this together. Thank you very much for all our dignitaries, the big brass. As now you got a brass plaque to go with that, to attend it tonight, and Charmaine for navigating. We know that these are very trying times, but thanks for getting us through. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you at the 10th annual lecture next year. Bonnie, our MBA 2022 class president, will now give the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Just want to say to Mr. Divanage, I hope I'm pronouncing the surname correctly. I'd like to extend our heartfelt and sincere gratitude for the presentation that you've given to us this evening. It has not just only given us the understanding of what values-led leadership is, but it has given us practical example of what it is and what it is not. And I think as leaders in our different spheres of work, we will leave here and ask the question that you said, it's a magic question. What can we do about it? And it doesn't have values-led leadership. What I've learned is that the cost benefit does not have to be realized immediately, but it can be realized in future. So from the class of MBA 2022, thank you so much. The learning today really has enhanced our MBA experience, and it has given us practical example for our future endeavors. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you. So that concludes the 9th annual lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you.